California Governor Gavin Newsom has been making headlines recently for his tweets attempting to imitate the style of President Trump. But in an interview earlier this week, he struck a much more serious tone.
When talking about Trump, Newsom claimed that other world leaders are laughing at the president behind his back. Take a look.
Behind his back. He's being played everywhere. It's an embarrassment. They are. I'm just telling you. That's universal.
But perhaps Newsom's most notable comments came when discussing the 2028 election. The governor is sounding the alarm bell, warning people about what he says is a real possibility of Trump trying to stay in office beyond the end of his second term. Here's what Newsom had to say.
You think he's joking about 2028? You think when he brings foreign leaders to the Oval Office and he goes to the White House store, have you seen this? Anyone? Is it just me? And he shows them the 2028 hats? He's not being serious? Wake up. You will lose your country. Again, it's not about Democrats. It's about all of us.
So you're absolutely convinced he's...
I'm absolutely convinced.
2028.
You've seen it. He's tried to steal the last election. He's trying to rig it in plain sight this time.
The 22nd Amendment prohibits anyone from serving more than 2 terms as president. In the past, Trump has floated the idea of running again in 2028, but other Republicans have insisted that this is just a joke. And in May, Trump denied considering a 3rd term in an NBC interview. He said, quote, "This is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have 4 great years and turn it over to somebody, ideally a great Republican. But I think we're going to have 4 years, and I think 4 years is plenty of time to do something really spectacular."
Well, I would be on Gavin Newsom's side in this one. In relation to the danger that Trump poses to democracy, as I see it, it is worth noting that Donald Trump has never accepted the result of any election that he lost. He didn't obviously do so to President Biden in 2020. The other instance was back in 2016, where people forget Ted Cruz beat him in the Iowa caucuses, and he immediately started contending that there was some sort of nefariousness around that. So I don't think that Donald Trump respects democracy, and I don't think that he is joking about some of the things that he says. Now, running for a 3rd term seems to me would be flagrantly unconstitutional, but warning about the dangers of Trump to democracy and to pluralism, I think, is very, very valid. When you look at many, many things that he has done, the attempts to insert himself into private universities, the attempt to punish law firms who've represented opponents, firing of inspectors general. Just within this month, we have a sort of attack on facts in terms of the Bureau of Labour Statistics comes out with weak jobs data. He fires the head of that. The Defense Intelligence Agency came out with an assessment of the damage done to Iran's nuclear program. Head of that gets fired. So you put all of that on top of Trump's record of not respecting election results, and I agree with the tenor of what Newsom said.
Obviously, it would take a long time for me to go through each one of those individual examples, but I'll just say a little bit broad, which is that one of the things that I think people either fail to understand or maybe they just don't want to about Trump when he doesn't rule things out is this is just how he communicates on things like that. Like, if you ask Trump, will you rule this out? He's going to say no every single time, or he's going to say, no, I won't rule it out, because he doesn't like to be pressured into rejecting something. He wants all of the decisions to be on his own terms. He doesn't want to give the impression that he's being bullied or goaded into decision-making by the press, which I think is a huge part of the previous comments we've received about 2028, which he flatly rejected in this other interview this year, where he said, this is not something I'm looking to do. I'm looking to have a great 4 years and turn it over to somebody, ideally a great Republican. I mean, maybe I'm naive, Niall. Maybe he's gonna seize the 3rd term, but as someone in the conservative movement, we see the 2028 hats, and it's a troll job.
So the point that he tends to not rule things out is correct, in that when you say to him, people have asked him at various times, will you rule this, that, or the other out? And he almost always says,
oh, I'm going to take a look at it,
exactly.
We'll see.
And then it becomes this headline of Trump refuses to rule out,
right.
Earn
whatever. Media.
But the difficulty that I have with that argument in a broader sense, Amber, you were talking about going broad. Mm-hmm. When he lost the 2020 election, we were told by various people, I think Mick Mulvaney, who's actually a contributor to our sister network, if I recall, wrote an op-ed somewhere talking about the fact that basically, don't worry about the fact that Trump is objecting to all of this. He's just taking some time to acclimate himself to having lost. And we are now, 5 years on? He still contends that election was fraudulent. You and I have spoken before about January the 6th. We probably don't need to relitigate that again. But there is sometimes a tendency, I think, from people who are sympathetic to Trump to say either, oh, he's only blowing off steam, or he's only trolling liberals, until the point when it becomes clear that in fact he's not trolling liberals, and there is, in my opinion, much too much of a propensity within the conservative movement, or certainly within the Republican Party, to basically let him off the hook for things that seem, among other things, blatantly unconservative to me, in terms of, putting the military on the streets and things like that.
It's not conservative, it's populist. It's an important distinction, but I want to get into the political strategy of this, because we obviously disagree about
fair enough.
The 2020 election in January, all of that. But just from what Gavin Newsom's saying, he obviously intends to run for president in 2028. I mean, I can't say it with 100% certainty, but
he's positioning himself.
Right.
Yeah.
When we look at the November 2024 polling, and even in the lead up to the election, a lot of Democrats thought that they had this election in the bag because defending democracy was a top 3 issue for voters next to the economy and immigration. But what we ended up seeing from exit polls is that defending democracy meant different things to different people. For Democrats, defending democracy meant stopping Trump. For Republicans, defending democracy maybe meant taking on the deep state or getting Democrats out of office. And so there was actually a pretty even split on voters who said their top issue was defending democracy, which candidate they ended up selecting at the ballot box. We also know that if you ask people about January 6th, they don't care about it anymore. It's been 4 years on at this point, and they don't have very strong feelings. So I just think...
Hold on. I mean, that's not a universal opinion by any stretch. It is true that it wouldn't determine future elections, but a lot of people still have strong feelings about January the 6th.
Well, there have been polls on people who rate it as a top issue. And there have been polls on whether they think that this was a major threat to democracy or not. And I think it's pretty consistent that people don't feel that strongly about it. But all of that being said, let's focus on just it's not a top issue for voters, right? People are not thinking about January 6th when they're pulling the trigger on who they're voting for president. I think that Gavin Newsom going really hard on this democracy argument is a losing argument for the left when, as we discussed earlier, things like economy and immigration are incredibly salient for voters right now, the economy especially so. And unless Trump literally does end up trying to stay for a third term or running for office again, a lot of people are going to brush Gavin Newsom off as one of the blue anon crazies.
So, first of all, I'll take issue with the blue anon crazies, but I don't want to get us sidetracked from the broader argument that you're making. It is true that the attempt in 2024 to cast Trump as a danger to democracy and unelectable for that reason self-evidently did not work. That then raises the question of, the issue, in my opinion, of his danger, the danger he poses to democracy, a belief that I hold that he does pose such a danger, is so important that you should make it irrespective of whether it is electorally effective or not. There are issues...
there's a moral imperative.
There's a moral imperative, yeah. I mean, this is a very inexact analogue, but you and other people have very strong views on abortion, right? Now, you would not say, I don't think you would say anyway, you wouldn't cease to be pro-life if it were proven that being pro-life were an electorally ineffective position, right? You think that is a moral imperative, as I understand your view.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't do that.
Yeah. So there are issues that are so vital, and where there is such an imperative to make them, that I think it is important to make them. Whether it is sufficient to win an election is a different question. And making the Trump is a danger to democracy argument does not preclude you from making economic arguments or any other kind of argument. But from a democratic or liberal perspective, to ignore what we see as these massive aberrational threats that Trump poses, I think it would be a mistake to just gloss over them.
Yeah, it's obviously true that talking about Trump as a threat to democracy is not mutually exclusive from talking about other political issues. I think my concern would be, if I were a Democrat, is if most of the American public doesn't agree with you, and this is something that you're very insistent on talking about, does it cause you to lose credibility on those other issues? Are people going to think that you're being overly dramatic, or that you're being a conspiracy theorist, etc.? That would be what I would caution Gavin Newsom of doing. There's a lot of Americans who don't see they don't think putting the National Guard to clean up crime is like fascist. They're happy crime's going down.
Well, they're very, but to use another example of the kind of thing that Newsom's alluding to, they were very unhappy with the pardoning and mass clemency of people convicted of January the 6th offences. So, Trump's approval rating writ large is not that fantastic. It's still pretty tepid in a lot of cases, and he's obviously massively polarizing. And, we could obviously go back and forth a long time as to our differing views on him. But the point about it is, from my perspective, for liberals, this is not just a Republican president or a conservative president. Yes, George W. Bush was widely disliked in liberal circles primarily for the war in Iraq, but there was not a belief that he was an authoritarian leader or a would-be authoritarian. I think there is that belief among liberals regarding Trump. I think they're right to believe that. I think that they are right to make that argument. And I'm not sure or not persuaded that it is as off-putting to voters as you think it is.
I think my other point on this would be, outside of the particular feelings about individual Trump policies, is that people also look back at the Biden administration and don't feel like he was some defender of democracy either. There was the FBI spying on Catholics, referring school board parents as domestic terrorists, using the FBI to plot a kidnapping scheme of the Michigan governor, the continued COVID lockdowns, the vaccine mandates, kicking people out of the military and the federal government because they didn't want to get a shot that was only authorized under emergency use authorization. The list really could go on, but I think suffice to say, having the DHS have a censorship regime where they were pushing social media companies under threat of increased regulation to get rid of posts from conservative social media figures, in even advocating for censoring the president, that doesn't sound very democratic to me. And so I think I feel like, what are you talking about? Trump's authoritarian? Like, we just lived under Biden, censoring our free speech, investigating us with his DOJ. Like, what argument are the Democrats really making at that point?
I just would completely dispute that those things are of similar scale to what Trump is doing. You're arguing there that the attempt during a pandemic to curb what people believe to be misinformation is equivalent to someone seeking to overturn the results of a national election. That seems a completely implausible, incorrect parallel to draw to me.
Free speech is literally the First Amendment of our Constitution. If you have a government that is rejecting people's right to free speech under the guise of misinformation, a lot of which turned out to actually be true, by the way, during the pandemic, not to least of which was the idea that the vaccine would stop you from getting the virus, or that the virus was zoonotic in origin, or that women's menstrual cycles weren't being affected by the virus. I remember that coming out of the CDC and the FDA. They told us that repeatedly. So, I mean, if you cannot criticize your government or its policy, then that's not a democracy.
But this is a separate. We're getting into a topic here about the debates that took place over vaccinations and the effects of vaccines and things of that nature. What threat Trump poses is fundamentally about not accepting the bedrock of a democracy, which is the acceptance of the legitimacy of elections. The people of Georgia, to take one example, voted in 2020 for Joe Biden to be president. Trump sought to overturn their verdict, to have him fraudulently declared the winner. That is not at all the same as having measures aimed at curbing certain views about vaccinations.
I completely disagree. Free speech is fundamental to a democracy. I mean, we obviously place various levels of weight on those issues, and I also would dispute your characterization of what happened in Georgia.
Well, I dispute your characterization of what happened with vaccinations, so we can go round and round on that point. But anyway, finish your point.
Oh, I actually am curious about that. Which part of that do you dispute?
I dispute the fact that there was, as you characterize it, an intentional effort to crush true information. I think that there was an effort to cut down upon some figures who were intentionally or willfully spreading unscientific garbage at a time when the society writ large was challenged by a once-in-a-century pandemic.
But that is precisely the problem and why free speech is so important, because those people were making incorrect judgments that actually censored true information. What they thought was cranks on social media making up conspiracy theories, they actually ended up being true. And I would also add, Niall, that if you go back and read some of the emails between Dr. Fauci and his team during the pandemic, it actually makes quite clear that they knew that the virus could have potentially come from a lab leak, and that they did intentionally suppress that narrative because they thought it would be potentially damaging for public trust, and because Dr. Fauci had authorized the payments for the gain-of-function research. So to say like, oh, well, they just didn't know what they were doing, I mean, I just disagree with that flatly.
Well, I mean, I think that there are lots of communications that show Trump knew what he was doing when he was trying to overturn a democratic election. We've been told to wrap because it's the longest rising section in recorded history.
The world record.
For all our differences, Amber, I do always enjoy our conversations. We have a lot more to talk about on Rising. Stay with us.